Okay, here we go. Rolling.
Okay, so today, like Robbie and I are just reviewing some phys, and what we're looking at today is how blood pressure is controlled in the body. So we're just going to present it the way that we typically do. Like I'll kind of ask questions, Robbie might answer some questions, and we'll go through and we'll go over all the things that regulate blood pressure in the body, long and short term. So first of all, why is this important to know? So Robbie and I discussing this, if someone comes in and let's say they have high or low blood pressure, you need to understand what mechanisms are responsible for increasing or decreasing blood pressure and which mechanisms might not be working in the body. So we're going to go over long-term blood pressure regulation, short-term blood pressure regulation, and then we'll talk about the various organs that are involved in these pathways. So, looking at long-term regulation. So, Robbie, do you remember the methods of long-term blood pressure regulation?
This direct and indirect?
Yeah, so there's direct and indirect renal mechanisms. So, I'll kind of write things down just so we don't forget here. So, renal mechanisms are what control blood pressure long term. So renal mechanisms, renal being kidneys. So there we go, we already have one organ that's important for regulating blood pressure. So we'll talk about direct and indirect mechanism. So I'll write these down and then I'll kind of ask you, Robbie, what is the direct renal mechanism?
Basically regulating how much fluid is in your system.
Yeah, so the direct renal mechanism is basically the kidney's direct function. So if we have increased blood volume leading to increased blood pressure, right? So let's put that here. We have increased blood volume for whatever reason. That's going to lead to increased filtration at the kidneys, which leads to increased urine production. And as we get increased urine production, we obviously get water leaving the body. The more water that leaves the body, less blood volume, therefore decreased blood pressure. So this can work in like either direction. So if we have decreased blood pressure due to decreased blood volume, we would just get less filtration, therefore less urine production, and we would retain more water. So that would be the direct renal mechanism for maintaining blood pressure. Indirect renal mechanism, what's that, Robbie?
That's the renin and antigen.
Yeah. So
Can't pronounce it.
it's okay. Like pronouncing the words sometimes is frustrating. So we have our renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. So RAAS. So we learned this in first year, and I'll go over all like the pathways of it. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily super important to remember the pathway itself, but more just important to remember the organs that might be involved in that. So what happens is, let's say we have decreased blood pressure, okay? For whatever reason, like our blood pressure is lower. And what this leads to is increased renin production.
And where's renin come from?
By the kidneys.
By the kidney.
So this is again renal mechanism. So increased renin production from the kidneys. What happens with renin is it goes into our bloodstream. It combines with something that's readily available, angiotensinogen. Do you remember where that's from, Robbie?
That comes from the liver.
Tensinogen. Okay, so angiotensinogen coming from the liver. They come together, essentially, and what do they form?
Angiotensinogen number 1.
Yeah, angiotensin 1. So I'm just going to call that A1 for our purposes. So now that we have this, we have A1, and then what is A1 converted to?
Combines with ACE from the lungs to convert into angiotensinogen 2.
Yeah, so basically we have angiotensin converting enzyme, which is found in the lungs, converts angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2. Now, angiotensin II has a few functions in the body. I'm gonna just like write them out, and then if you want, maybe you can explain them.
Okay.
So, 4 primary functions of angiotensin II here, relating to regulating blood pressure. We have, it causes vasoconstriction. What else does it do? It
Heart rate.
aids in,
It does affect the heart in that it like increases either the stroke volume or like the heart rate itself. It has a small impact on the heart.
I haven't watched that video. I don't like doubt that that's a thing. I'm gonna write the 4 that I know. Is that cool? Okay, so causes vasoconstriction, increases release of ADH from where?
Posterior pituitary.
From posterior pituitary. Sorry, it's a little messy. Goes to the hypothalamus to stimulate thirst centers in the brain. So hypothalamus, we'll just do hypo, to stimulate thirst centers. Okay. And then, what's the last one, Robbie?
Aldosterone from the medulla cortex.
Yeah, so not the
medulla,
the adrenal cortex.
Adrenal cortex.
So the adrenal glands, which sit right above the kidneys, so you have the kidneys, and then you have its little hat here, which is the adrenal, the adrenal glands. Angiotensin II goes to the adrenal cortex, which is like the outer layer of the adrenal gland, and it stimulates the production of aldosterone. Okay, so let's go over these 4 things and why they lead to increased blood pressure. So if we have decreased blood pressure...
Do you want to do a separate video for that?
No, we can just do it here. It's okay if the video is a little longer. So vasoconstriction. Obviously, if we have vasoconstriction, that leads to increased blood pressure because you have more pressure exerted on those walls now. Increased ADH from the posterior pituitary. So what does ADH do?
ADH tells you not to pee.
Yeah, so antidiuretic hormone. It decreases like your amount of urine production. The hypothalamus stimulates thirst centers. Obviously, that makes you drink more water. The more water you drink, the higher your blood volume, the higher your blood pressure. Aldosterone, what does aldosterone do?
It tells the body to get rid of potassium and keep salt.
Yes.
And water follows salt.
Yes. So it basically increases sodium retention and it increases potassium excretion. I'm not going to put narrow for that. I'll just write potassium. We'll just say decrease because you're increasing the excretion of potassium within the kidneys. So again,
let me add something here. So for aldosterone, just because we don't have the organ for it, it comes from the adrenal cortex and targets the kidney.
Yeah.
And from the ADH from the posterior pituitary also targeting the kidney.
Yes. So before we kind of move on to the short-term regulation of blood pressure, let's just like go over the organs again that are involved in this pathway. So renin comes from the kidneys. So the kidneys detect low blood pressure in this case and increase renin production. So we know kidneys super important. They're already important for the direct renal mechanism. They're like basically the starter of the indirect renal mechanism. What else do we have? We have angiotensinogen, that comes from the liver. We have angiotensin I, which is the combination of those. We have angiotensin converting enzyme, which turns A1 into A2. ACE, which angiotensin converting enzyme comes from the
lungs.
Good. Now, looking at angiotensin II here, the effects that it has effects on the blood vessels. Again, we have posterior pituitary involved here. So again, in the brain, hypothalamus, again, brain, aldosterone, we're going back to, now we're here at the adrenal glands. Not the adrenal medulla, the adrenal cortex. Remember, the adrenal medulla is where you get those sympathetic nerve fibers, essentially, going to the adrenal medulla to stimulate the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine. Okay, that's long-term blood pressure regulation done. So we'll get rid of this. And
Can we take a picture of it first?
That's okay. You can like screenshot the.
Okay.
You can screenshot the video after. Okay, so let's get rid of this, and we'll do short term. Okay. So do you remember the two main things for short term blood pressure regulation, Robbie?
I can't remember.
Okay, so we have neural control, okay, and hormonal control, okay? Do you remember, I'll put the number of things here that are kind of involved. So 1, 2, 3, 4 for neural, and then again, 4 primary things for hormonal control. Neural control, can you rhyme them off or give me a couple?
You go ahead, I can't remember any of them right now.
Okay, so we have our cardiovascular center. Okay, I'm just gonna write cardio center. This is within the medulla oblongata. Then we have higher brain centers. And we're gonna go over all this, like how it works. So higher brain centers. We have baroreceptors, and most specifically baroreceptor reflexes. So I'm just gonna put baro R reflex, whatever, I'll just spell it out. I know this is messy, but this is how we do it. And then we have chemoreceptor reflexes. So just chemo reflexes. Okay, we'll go over the neural components of short-term blood pressure regulation. Then we'll go into hormonal. So now that I kind of like jogged your memory with that, Robbie, can you talk to me about the cardiovascular center a little bit? There's 3 like main components that we're concerned with here within the cardiovascular center. Do you remember those?
Like heart rate, stroke volume. Is that what you're going for?
Kind of. So we have the cardio acceleratory center. I'm gonna spell that out, but like I'm pretty sure that's right. Anyways, the cardio acceleratory center. We have the cardio inhibitory center. I'm just gonna do that because I don't want to write it all. And then we have the vasomotor center. So VM for vasomotor center. Now that I've jogged your memory with those, can you explain to me what those do?
So one increases heart rate, one decreases, and one constricts or relaxes the blood vessels.
Yes, so basically what we have here, neural control. These work within the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So cardio acceleratory center basically sends impulses through the sympathetic nerve fibers to the heart to increase heart rate and
Stroke volume?
yeah, stroke volume. And what does heart rate times stroke volume equal?
Blood pressure.
No. Heart rate times stroke volume equals cardiac output. So heart rate times stroke volume equals cardiac output. So overall here, we're just increasing cardiac output. By increasing cardiac output, that in turn is going to increase blood pressure. Okay? We have the cardio inhibitory center. So what is this going to do? What part of the nervous system are these nerve fibers going to run through?
The parasympathetic, so via vagus.
Vagus, yeah, to the heart. And it's just going to do the opposite. So it's just going to decrease heart rate and stroke volume. Cool. And then we have the vasomotor center. So what does the vasomotor center do?
Constrict or dilate the blood vessels.
Yeah, so it controls, obviously, the vasomotor tone of the blood vessels. And it does this by either increasing or decreasing firing through sympathetic nerves to those blood vessels. So it either causes vasoconstriction or vasodilation. Now, vasodilation doesn't necessarily mean that we're sending parasympathetic signals. We're just decreasing sympathetic because you don't have any parasympathetic innervation to those blood vessels. So through these, we can kind of increase our blood pressure or decrease our blood pressure. Why is that? It's because, again, if you increase vasoconstriction, that increases peripheral resistance, And if you increase peripheral resistance, you're going to increase blood pressure. Here in this case, you're increasing cardiac output, so you're increasing blood pressure. In this case, if you're stimulating the cardioinhibitory center and you're inhibiting the cardioacceleratory and vasomotor center, then you're going to get decreased blood pressure. So these neural pathways are basically our main way of regulating blood pressure short term. So that's the cardiovascular center in the medulla. Now, the good thing about that is if you understand that, the higher brain centers, the baroreceptor reflexes, and the chemoreceptor reflexes, they all interact with that cardiovascular center. So higher brain centers, what do we got?
The cortex?
Yeah, so higher brain centers in this case, all we're talking about is if we're in a fight or flight situation, we're going to influence our cardiovascular center. So fight or flight, we're going to increase vasomotor center output and increase cardioacceleratory center output, and that's going to increase blood pressure by increasing cardiac output. Okay, baroreceptor reflexes. What are those, Robbie?
They sense blood pressure on mostly the aorta and carotid.
Yes, so our baroreceptors are essentially just stretch receptors in our blood vessels, and they're located, we have them in the neck, and then we have them in basically all the large arteries of the thorax. So in the neck, it's primarily for maintaining basically safe blood pressure to the head, and then in the thorax, the large arteries of the thorax, the baroreceptors there, they send signals back to the cardiovascular center, and it's to ensure that we have adequate blood pressure through systemic circulation. So that's it really. Again, baroreceptors found in the neck and large arteries of the thorax. That's primarily where they're located. Chemoreceptor reflexes, I guess actually let's talk about baroreceptor reflexes a bit, just like the effects that they would have, just so that it's understood. So if you had increased blood pressure, what would that do? What would our baroreceptors do?
They would notice it as like being stretched.
Yeah,
and they
stretch
would,
of the blood vessel.
They would, unless being overridden by like sympathetic input, would communicate back to the brain and then out and inhibit the sympathetic tone, or cause the heart not pump as hard long term.
Yeah, exactly. So if you have increased blood pressure, it's just the baroreceptors are going to notice that as stretch in the arteries. It's going to send signals back to the cardiovascular center, and it's going to manipulate these three things that we talked about to decrease blood pressure. Mm-hmm. So in this case, it would work to increase stimulation of the cardioinhibitory center, and then decrease cardioacceleratory center and vasomotor center. Okay, cool. Chemoreceptor reflexes. Let's go into that now. So chemoreceptor reflexes, what do they measure? What are they sensitive to?
The chemicals in the blood?
Yeah, chemicals in the blood. It's that simple. So we have our blood gases and we have pH. Those are the primary things that we're concerned about, at least with chemoreceptor reflexes for maintaining blood pressure. So if we have, I'll give you a scenario and you can explain to me what the effect would be. So we have decreased oxygen in the blood. Okay, we have decreased concentration of oxygen. We have increased carbon dioxide, and we have decreased pH. What is that going to do? What are the chemoreceptors going to do?
So the chemoreceptors are going to communicate with the cardioacceleratory and vasomotor to constrict it and increase exchange of fluids to help get more oxygen into the bloodstream, get rid of some of the alkaline?
So it would basically increase the pH. So
increase the pH.
You're right on. It's the chemoreceptors relay this information to the cardiovascular center, and again we have manipulation of these. Now, if we have decreased oxygen, increased carbon dioxide, and decrease pH. What we want to do is we want to increase the amount of blood going back to the heart and lungs so that we can increase the amount of gas exchange that we have at the lungs, therefore increasing that pH back to normal, increasing our oxygen levels back to normal, and getting rid of some of that carbon dioxide. So in this case, we're going to increase cardioacceleratory center output, increase vasomotor center output, and decrease cardioinhibitory center output. Okay, that is the neural component, basically taken out of the way. One thing that I want to note though about chemoreceptors is that although in this case they're important for regulating blood pressure, chemoreceptor reflexes actually tend to have more of an effect on our respiration. You guys remember probably in first year that if we have decreased oxygen, increased carbon dioxide, and decreased pH, we want to increase respiration to basically get more oxygen, get rid of that carbon dioxide, and get our pH back to normal. So chemoreceptor reflexes have a stronger influence on respiratory rate rather than what we have here, the cardiovascular center. So it'll go to the respiratory center as well, which is also located in the medulla. That's just a fun fact.
Yeah, but those two are really closely tied because if you increase respiratory rate without increasing heart rate, you're not going to be cleaning as much blood, which is where all these chemicals are found. So you need to have them both increase simultaneously.
Cool. Okay, so I'll leave that part up, but let's get rid of this so that we have some room to talk about hormonal control for short-term blood pressure regulation. So what are the 4 main hormones that we're talking about in this case?
The one we talked about before, angiotensin, the one that I can't say?
Yeah, so we primary, in this case, we're going to talk about angiotensin 2.
Yes.
So angiotensin 2. Now again, although this is, in this case, we're talking about short-term blood pressure regulation, it's also involved in like that long-term indirect renal mechanism. So we have angiotensin 2, that's one of them. Can you give me another?
AMP, is that one?
So atrial natriuretic peptides, yeah, so AMP, but there's also BNP, which is like in the brain. So we're just going to call it, for these purposes, natriuretic peptides. And we also talked about all this in first year, but again, we're just kind of presenting this as a way of understanding blood pressure and how our body regulates that. So natriuretic peptides, and then you guys might know of AMP. There's also BNP, but that has more to do with the brain. Okay.
So from the heart, from the brain.
Yeah, atrial, as in atria of the heart. Okay. So now, what else do we have? 2 more hormones.
Aldosterone and NE.
So aldosterone is a hormone, but we're going to tie that more in angiotensin 2. So let's talk about
adrenaline.
Adrenaline. So we have epinephrine or norepinephrine. Okay, and then we have last one.
I can't remember right now.
This one fights against it.
Antidiuretic hormone.
Yeah, ADH. Okay, so let's talk about the effects of these. Angiotensin 2, we already talked about it, but I'm going to go over it one more time here. Angiotensin 2 has 4 main effects here. Okay, so first one, or one of them, and not that they're in a specific order.
Like the vasomotor.
Vasoconstriction, stimulates vasoconstriction.
Keeps water in the kidney.
Yep, so you're talking about aldosterone, so it increases aldosterone release from the adrenal cortex, which increases sodium retention and potassium excretion. Okay, what else does it do? 2 things where it kind of goes to the brain to create these effects.
ADH it's tied into as well.
Yeah, so it'll increase ADH. And again, like, the way that I'm presenting this is from a textbook. So I know that we have ADH here, but this also will increase that ADH output from the
Posterior pituitary.
Cool. And then, last effect, hypothalamus, what does it do?
Thirst centers.
Thirst centers, TC. Okay, cool. Let's erase that and talk about the next one. So again, we talked about that one twice now, but it does have a few effects there, so it's good to review a couple times. Okay, natriuretic peptides. Actually, let's leave that one to the end. Let's do ADH.
Yep.
What does ADH do?
It's from posterior pituitary, targeting the renal gland, or like the kidneys, and it basically tells them to retain water.
Yeah, so decrease diuresis, so anti-diuretic. Diuresis being urination. So it just, again, goes to kidneys and stimulates like water retention, so less urine production. So decreased urine production. Okay, let's do epinephrine and norepinephrine.
They're adrenaline, and they're going to cause vasoconstriction.
Yeah, so epinephrine and norepinephrine, and again, we understand that if we increase vasoconstriction, we therefore increase
Blood pressure.
That's what we're talking about here. And then we have natriuretic peptides, and what do they do? So I'm just going to write AMP and just for short form. So atrial natriuretic peptide, what does it do?
So they block angiotensin 2 and
Angiotensin 2. You'll get the word one day, I know you will.
and ADH, antidiuretic.
Yeah, so they antagonize these two. They're like, we don't like you, so we're going to stop that. So if they antagonize that, what do they work to do?
Lower blood pressure.
Lower blood pressure. Cool. So that's how our body regulates blood pressure long term and short term. And we kind of went over some of the major pathways and major organs involved. So if someone comes in and they have increased or decreased blood pressure, it's important to know this stuff because you want to know where things are coming from, where might dysfunction be present, and then how am I going to go about treating that. And you're not treating that, you're treating restriction in motion when we're talking about osteopathy. But like, how are those things tied together between viscera and our body, like our somatic
Let's
system?
list out all the organs, and then those organs are the things that we can affect, having effect on all this physiology.
Yeah.
So you can affect the kidneys' blood flow, you can affect the liver's blood flow, you can affect blood flow to the brain and neural flow to all these organs as well.
Yeah, and we're
to affect all of these things.
Yeah, and we're not trying to like preach like we know anything about osteopathy. That's not what we're saying. We're just saying like, how could this be useful in the future once we actually maybe know a thing about osteopathy, which we don't yet. Yeah. So, okay, so what organs?
So like liver, kidney.
Liver. Why the liver?
So the liver is what produces renal.
Nope.
Oh, sorry, angiotensin.
Angiotensinogen. Okay. Kidney?
Produces renin, and it's the filter and it's the target of many of those other hormones. Yeah,
so it basically starts up it's what's responsible for the direct and indirect renal mechanisms. Huge when it comes to blood pressure regulation, especially long term. Okay, and again, that's why if you have increased blood pressure, you're going to have increased stress on that kidney because it has to do so much more.
Yeah.
You don't want it to be having to do so much because eventually over time, obviously, that's going to take a toll on the kidney.
Yeah.
Okay, what else?
Which is probably the reason why we have two kidneys, for redundancy, because of this. Mm-hmm. In case one gets messed up, you need that redundancy, otherwise you're dead.
Okay.
Posterior pituitary.
Okay, so we have like some stuff
in the brain.
So we have posterior pituitary.
Medulla.
So we have so this isn't like in a specific order, but like you guys can look at the other content and then kind of make your connections here. So this isn't in an order, but medulla. What does medulla contain?
The cardiovascular centers.
Yeah. Okay. Posterior pituitary. What was the involvement of the posterior pituitary?
Antidiuretic hormone.
Okay. Cool. Anything else in the brain?
The thirst centers from the thalamus.
Yeah, part of the diencephalon. Okay. Hypothalamus. What are the other parts of the diencephalon, Robbie?
I can't remember.
The thalamus and hypothalamus. Okay, cool. What else we got?
Oh,
Is there anything else?
yeah. So posterior pituitary is part of the dicephalon. It's part of the epithalamus, right? Or like
Um,
closely related to it.
It's the hypothalamus typically secretes hormones which go to the pituitary, and it's primarily the posterior pituitary where those hormones come from. There is like the anterior pituitary, but I think, again, don't quote me on this because I haven't looked at this in years, but anterior pituitary releases less hormones than the posterior pituitary. But yeah, hypothalamus and pituitary are kind of related.
All right, rabbit trail then.
Yeah. Okay, and then what else? We had one more that I think was in there.
I'm not sure. What am I
ACE,
missing?
angiotensin converting enzyme.
Yeah, so the lungs.
Lungs. So, again, so many different organs here play a role. Where is the problem coming from?
Yeah.
You might not be able to tell, but
And some of them are so closely linked. Like the medulla controls the heart and the lungs, and I guess you put the heart there too.
yeah,
Yeah.
heart and lungs definitely. Like
Yeah.
that's gonna be huge. Okay, cool. I think that's pretty much it for
Yeah, that's
like
pretty
what we
good.
want to talk about for our purposes, blood pressure.
And drop the chop.
But yeah, that's it.
Thanks, guys.